Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm so glad to have you here today. In this video, we're going to explore a unique story and use it as a tool to boost your English listening and speaking skills. We'll dive into the exciting world of survival, tough choices, and self-discovery, just like the journey in the chapters we've been exploring. Through this narrative, you'll not only improve your listening skills, but also gain the confidence to speak more fluently and naturally. So, let's get started and spark up your English journey together. Chapter 1. The Journey Across the Sea. It was a warm summer day when everything began. I was 27 years old, living in New York City. At the time, I had a steady job in a corporate office, working as a financial analyst. I was good at what I did, and my career seemed to be going well. My colleagues respected me, and I had a comfortable life. But despite all that, I often felt a sense of loneliness creeping in. You see, I was living in a big city, surrounded by thousands of people, but I had no one to share my days with. I was single, with no close family nearby, and my friends were scattered across the country. The days felt long, and in the quiet moments after work, I realized how alone I truly was. But that day, I had a plan. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had decided to take a break from the hustle and bustle of city life. I had always been an outdoor person, and one of the things I loved to do was sail. My boat, a small but reliable sailboat, was docked at a marina near the bay, and I hadn't taken it out in a while. So, I decided to make the most of the day and set out for a leisurely sail. The wind was light, the sky was clear, and the water looked inviting. I felt a sense of freedom as I untied the ropes, hoisted the sails, and set off into the bay. There was something soothing about being out on the water, the gentle rocking of the boat, the sound of the wind, and the rhythmic motion of the waves beneath me. For hours, I sailed aimlessly, letting the wind take me wherever it wanted to. It was peaceful, a welcome escape from my busy life. I didn't have any particular destination in mind. I simply wanted to enjoy the solitude and the beauty of the sea. As I sailed farther out, I started to lose track of time. The sun was high in the sky and the temperature was perfect. But as the day wore on, the wind picked up. What had started as a light breeze turned into a strong gust, pushing my boat further and further from the bay. I tried to adjust the sails, but the wind was relentless. The boat was small and couldn't handle the force of the wind. I began to worry. I wasn't too far out, but I didn't want to risk being caught in the open water when the sun started to set. I tried to turn the boat around, but the wind was too strong. Panic began to set in. I had sailed out far enough that I couldn't see the shore anymore, and the horizon seemed endless. I was alone, completely isolated, and I didn't know what to do. The boat was struggling against the waves, and I could feel the tension in the air as the wind howled around me. The sea was vast, and I realized how small and insignificant I was in that moment. As the hours passed, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the water. The temperature dropped, and I could feel the cold creeping in. My small boat was being tossed around by the waves, and I had no control over where it was going. I was losing hope, feeling utterly helpless. It was one of those moments when you realize how fragile life is, how quickly things can go from calm to chaotic. Night fell, and I was still drifting, with no land in sight. The waves grew larger, and the wind howled through the rigging of the boat. I was cold, exhausted, and scared. I had no idea where I was, and I couldn't see a way out. I thought about the people back in New York, my colleagues, my friends. Would they even know I was missing? Would anyone come looking for me? I didn't know. I was alone in the middle of the ocean, with no way of knowing what would happen next. Just as I thought all hope was lost, a small light appeared in the distance. It was faint at first, barely visible through the darkness, but it was there. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it might be some kind of mirage, but I focused on it, hoping it was real. Slowly, as the light grew brighter, I realized it was a ship. A small British brig was heading straight towards me. I didn't know how, but they had spotted me. They must have seen the faint outline of my sailboat in the distance. As the ship got closer, I could see the crew on deck, their faces illuminated by the ship's lanterns. They threw me a rope and pulled my small sailboat alongside their ship. At that moment, I felt a rush of relief. I was saved. The crew on board the brig helped me aboard, and I was given a warm blanket and food. I was still in shock, but I couldn't help but feel grateful. They told me they were headed to London, and after a brief exchange of words, I realized that was my only option. I had no money, no plan, and nowhere to go. I was a stranger in a strange land, and the only choice I had was to go with them. The journey to London was long and arduous. The ship sailed through stormy seas, and I spent most of my time below deck, helping with the duties of the crew to earn my keep. I worked as a sailor on the ship, learning quickly how to navigate the ropes, handle the sails, and assist the crew with the daily tasks. It wasn't easy, but it kept my mind off the fear and uncertainty that had gripped me since the day I set sail. When I finally arrived in London, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. My clothes were ragged, my hair was tangled, and I felt like I had aged years in just a few weeks. I had no money, no belongings, and no real plan for the future. I was truly starting over in a city that was completely unfamiliar to me. I stepped off the ship and onto the docks, a stranger in a new world. My journey had been one of survival, of losing everything I thought I knew, and finding myself in a completely new place. As I stood there taking in the bustling streets of London, I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I had made it. I had survived the journey across the sea, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 2. The Desperate Search. I remember stepping off the ship onto the crowded, bustling streets of London. It was a cold, overcast morning, and the air smelled of salt water mixed with the smoky exhaust of the city's busy roads. The sounds of the city were overwhelming. The clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the chatter of pedestrians, the cries of street vendors selling everything from newspapers to fruit. For a moment, I felt disoriented, like I was floating in a world where nothing made sense and I had no anchor. I stood there for a few moments trying to get my bearings. My clothes were tattered from the rough journey. My boots were worn down, and my face, I'm sure, was streaked with dirt from the days spent on the ship. I had no idea where to go or what to do next. The million-dollar question loomed in my mind. How would I survive in this massive city with nothing but the dollar in my pocket? I had no friends, no contacts, just me, a stranger in a foreign land. My first instinct was to find food. I hadn't eaten anything substantial since the IC meal on the ship, and my stomach was beginning to gnaw at me in a way that made me feel weak. I walked down the busy street, my eyes scanning the area for any signs of food. There were bakeries with windows full of fresh bread, but I didn't have enough to buy even a loaf. There were cafes with people sitting comfortably inside, sipping tea and eating pastries. But the thought of walking into one and begging for a meal seemed impossible. I felt my hope slipping away with each passing minute. It was then that I spotted a young boy. He was walking along the street, holding a large, ripe pear in his hand. He looked so carefree, his face flushed with the joy of a simple afternoon snack. I could feel my mouth watering as I watched him take a bite. It looked delicious, juicy and sweet, the perfect thing to satisfy my growing hunger. Without thinking, I followed him at a distance, hoping to get a glimpse of where he would go. I needed to eat that pear. My legs ached with hunger, and my head felt light. There was no way I could survive much longer without food, and that pear, just one small bite, seemed like it could make all the difference. As luck would have it, the boy suddenly dropped the pear onto the street. It fell with a soft thud, and for a moment I stood frozen, staring at the fruit. The boy didn't notice, and I hesitated. My mind raced as I wondered if I should take it. After all, it was just a pear, a small thing in a vast city. No one would miss it. But even so, a sense of shame washed over me. I felt embarrassed, as though I were about to commit some grave sin. People were walking by, none of them paying attention to the boy or the pear. I stood there waiting for the right moment to act, waiting for the streets to clear so I could snatch it up without anyone noticing. But every time I moved toward it, someone else would pass by. I would quickly turn away, pretending I hadn't seen it, hoping they wouldn't notice the desperation in my eyes. This went on for what felt like an eternity. I tried several times, but the same thing kept happening. I couldn't bring myself to take the pear in front of others. The shame I felt was almost too much to bear. It was just a pear, but at that moment, it represented everything I had lost. My dignity, my pride, my ability to survive. I was becoming desperate, my hunger starting to cloud my judgment. Finally, I decided that I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and moved toward the pear. This time, I didn't care who saw me. I wasn't going to let my pride get in the way of survival. Just as I bent down to pick it up, a voice called out behind me, "Excuse me, young man. Come in here, please." I froze. The voice was calm, but there was an urgency to it. I stood up and turned around, looking for the source. A well-dressed man was standing at the door of a large building, beckoning me in. His face was kind, but there was something authoritative about his presence. He didn't look like someone who would be interested in a homeless stranger like me. But something about the invitation felt different, like he had been expecting me. I didn't hesitate. At this point, I felt like I had nothing left to lose. I walked up to the door, and the man opened it wide, letting me inside. The warmth from the building was a stark contrast to the cold of the street, and the smell of food was almost too much for my starving body to handle. My stomach growled louder, and the man seemed to hear it. "Come in, come in. You must be hungry," he said, his voice deep and welcoming. "Sit, and let's get you something to eat." I followed him into the house, my mind spinning with questions. Who was this man? Why was he helping me? I was too hungry to think clearly, so I sat down at the table he pointed to. As soon as I did, a servant appeared with a tray of food, bread, soup, and fresh fruit. It was more than I had eaten in days, and I devoured it eagerly, barely able to savor the flavors. As I ate, I looked around the room. It was elegant, filled with expensive furniture and fine paintings on the walls. This was no ordinary home. The man who had invited me in sat across from me, watching me eat without saying a word. There was something in his eyes, something knowing. It was as if he could read my thoughts, my fears, my every move. Finally, after I had eaten my fill, the man spoke. "You seem like someone who's been through a lot," he said, his voice soft. "I can see that you're not from here and you don't have much." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I felt embarrassed, my cheeks flushing as I realized how much I had been reduced to. But the man didn't judge me. Instead, he seemed intrigued, almost as though my story held some kind of value. "Let me tell you something," he continued. "You're not the first to come to London with nothing. In fact, there's a certain kind of person who arrives in this city with nothing, but somehow they find a way to survive. It's all about the choices you make." His words hung in the air, and I felt like he was trying to tell me something important, something I didn't fully understand. But before I could ask any questions, a second man walked into the room. He was older, more stoic, and his eyes studied me intently as if evaluating my every move. "Is he the one?" the second man asked, his voice deep and steady. The first man nodded, then turned to me. "I think you're exactly who we've been looking for." I was confused. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky from hunger and exhaustion. "We'll explain everything soon," the first man replied. "But for now, rest. You're not alone anymore." As I lay down to rest in the warm room, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet understand. I had no idea who these men were or what they wanted from me, but I knew one thing. I was no longer starving, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Chapter 3. A Bet Like No Other. The next morning, after I had been well fed and allowed to rest in the comfort of the man's house, I woke up to a new sense of unease. Something about the situation felt strange, too convenient, too planned. But for the first time in days, I wasn't hungry. I wasn't alone. There was a strange, almost comforting certainty in the air, like the world was offering me a second chance. I tried to push my fears aside, telling myself that I couldn't afford to question the kindness I had received. but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this than what met the eye. I had barely finished dressing when the servant who had brought me food the night before returned. His manner was polite, almost formal, as he led me back to the sitting room where the two men were waiting. The older man, Mr. Harris, was sitting in a chair by the fireplace, reading a book, while the other man, Mr. Morris, stood by the window, gazing out at the street. Both men looked up when I entered, their faces unreadable, yet somehow expectant. "Good morning," Mr. Harris said with a small smile, his voice smooth and refined. "I trust you slept well?" I nodded. "Yes, thank you. I feel much better now." "Good. You needed rest, of course," Mr. Morris added, his tone somewhat more curt. "Now that you're awake, we can discuss matters." I raised an eyebrow, feeling the air grow heavier with each passing word. "What matters?" I asked cautiously, unsure of what they were leading up to. Mr. Harris put down his book and looked at me directly. There was a kind of sharpness in his eyes, a glint of something calculating. "We've been discussing your situation since last night," he began, his voice calm but firm. "And we've come to an agreement. But first, let me explain the circumstances." I felt a pang of anxiety settle in my chest. What kind of agreement were they talking about? My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. They hadn't told me anything about their intentions until now, and that only made me feel more uneasy. "We're not your typical benefactors, young man," Mr. Morris interjected, his voice carrying a hint of amusement, as if he found my confusion somehow entertaining. "We don't simply offer help out of charity, if that's what you were expecting. No, there's something much more interesting at play here." I shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing, waiting for them to continue. I had no choice but to listen. "Several days ago," Mr. Harris continued, "my brother and I were discussing a rather peculiar idea. We've both lived long enough to know that life can be as unpredictable as it is unfair. We've seen men with riches lose it all and men with nothing climb to the top." He paused, clearly savoring the suspense he was building. I tried to follow his words, but I couldn't make heads or tails of what they were getting at. "Let me cut to the chase," Mr. Morris said abruptly, his tone hardening. "We've made a bet, a very unusual bet." I couldn't help but stare at him. A bet? What kind of bet was this? I thought I had heard wrong, but his next words confirmed my worst suspicion. "You see, we've had an argument," Mr. Morris continued, pacing back and forth across the room, "about a certain type of person, a stranger. arriving in London with nothing but a single large sum of money. A person who is honest, intelligent, but without any means of support. I frowned, not understanding where he was going with this. I don't follow. The bet is simple, Mr. Harris explained, leaning forward slightly in his chair. If a person like that comes to London with nothing but a large banknote, how do you think they will survive? Can they survive for 30 days without being locked up, thrown out, or starving? We argued about whether such a person could make it. I blinked in confusion. You bet on whether or not a person could survive with just a large sum of money? Exactly, Mr. Morris replied with a cold smile. You see, the Bank of England recently issued 2 notes, each worth £1 million. One was used for a public transaction with a foreign country, and the other remained in their vaults. We thought to ourselves, what would happen if an honest and intelligent stranger arrived with one of these notes but no other means of support? Would they starve, or could they find a way to live? I was taken aback. This was absurd. So, what? You want me to participate in your bet? Ah, Mr. Harris said, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. That's where it gets interesting. Both men stood up now, and Mr. Morris walked over to a table where an envelope rested. He picked it up and handed it to me without a word. I opened it cautiously, but what I saw inside made my stomach drop. It was a banknote worth £1 million. I stared at it, unable to speak. This couldn't be real. This was madness. How could they possibly think I could survive? With just this note? You're the one we've been waiting for, Mr. Morris said, watching me closely. You meet all the criteria: honest, intelligent, and it seems down on your luck. You've arrived in London with nothing, just as we imagined. So, we've made our bet. We believe you'll fail. But my brother here? He gestured to Mr. Harris, who nodded with a small smile. Thinks you'll manage to survive for 30 days. If you succeed, we'll give you anything you want. Anything? I asked, the word tasting strange in my mouth. What exactly does that mean? Anything, Mr. Harris repeated, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. A job, a salary, anything. The best position we can offer. If you fail, though, well, you'll lose, and we'll have our fun. I looked between the 2 men, my mind spinning. This wasn't just a game to them. This was some sort of test, and I was the subject. But I had no choice. I had nothing left. I needed to survive, and somehow this £1 million note seemed like the key to unlocking a future I didn't yet understand. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Simple," Mr. Morris said with a grin. "You take that banknote, and you survive for 30 days without asking anyone for help, without exchanging it, without telling anyone what it is. If you manage to survive, you win the bet." I felt a strange sense of unease wash over me. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I knew one thing. This bet would change everything. As I looked at the banknote in my hand, I realized that my survival depended on my ability to outwit the system. I couldn't just walk into a bank and ask for change. If I did, the police would likely arrest me, thinking I had stolen the money. I had no choice but to play along with their game, and I had to win, because I didn't know what would happen if I lost. Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris smiled at each other, seemingly pleased with their little wager. I, on the other hand, was filled with doubt and fear. What would I do with £1 million if I couldn't use it? How would I survive? And so, with a mix of anxiety and determination, I stepped into the unknown. The bet had begun. Chapter 4: The $1 Million Mistake. The weight of the banknote in my pocket felt heavier than its actual size. Each step I took felt like I was carrying a burden, and the pressure mounted with every passing moment. The two gentlemen, Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris, had placed £1 million banknote in my hands, and the bet was now in full motion. They had walked away with their quiet smiles, thinking they had outsmarted me. But I wasn't sure how to play the game they had set in motion. Couldn't fathom how I was supposed to survive on this alone. The banknote was so large that it felt more like a trap than a lifeline. I had no intention of using it for anything too obvious, of course. That was exactly what they wanted. But every time I thought about how to use the money, a sense of dread settled in. It wasn't that I didn't trust the note. It was more about how people would react to seeing it. I couldn't just stroll into a bank and exchange it. It was too conspicuous. If anyone saw me with it, they would think I had stolen it. Or worse, they would think I was some kind of fraud. I walked aimlessly through the streets of London, my head swirling with thoughts of how to make this work. I passed by shop windows, displaying expensive clothes, fine watches, and accessories I would never have dreamed of owning. The city seemed so alive, yet so indifferent to me. The sounds of horse-drawn carriages on the cobblestone streets, the calls of street vendors, peddling their wares, it all seemed like a blur as I walked on. After hours of wandering, I found myself in front of a small cafe. The warm light shining through the windows, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods wafting out into the street, made my stomach growl. The cafe wasn't fancy, but it had a certain charm to it. I stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly. The owner, a middle-aged man with graying hair, smiled at me from behind the counter. "Good day, sir. What can I get for you?" he asked in a friendly tone, wiping his hands on a cloth. I hesitated. I had just enough to buy a simple meal, but I couldn't use the £1,000,000 note here. It would be too obvious, and I didn't want to attract attention. My hands were shaking, and I suddenly felt the weight of my situation more acutely than ever. I had to think quickly. "I'll have a simple breakfast," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Some bread, butter, and coffee, please." The owner nodded, preparing the food and bringing it to me with a smile. I sat at a small table by the window, trying to look like just another customer, but my mind was racing. As I sipped my coffee and nibbled on the bread, I noticed a few other customers in the cafe. A woman reading a book, an older gentleman reading a newspaper, a young man sketching in a notebook. None of them paid me any attention, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I needed a plan. The banknote in my pocket seemed like a lifeline, but every time I thought about using it, I could almost hear Mr. Morris's voice in my head, warning me not to exchange it, not to tell anyone what it was. He had said I had to survive on it for 30 days without revealing its true value. But how? How could I possibly make it through an entire month in a city like London with nothing but a single, unchangeable £1,000,000 note? I paid for my meal with the last of my small change, not daring to pull the large note from my pocket. The cafe owner didn't even question me as I handed over the coins. He just smiled and nodded. But as I left the cafe, the reality of my situation began to sink in even more. How could I survive for an entire month without using the money? How was this even possible? My thoughts were interrupted by a commotion in the street. A group of people had gathered around something, and curiosity got the best of me. I walked closer to see what was happening. In the middle of the crowd, a man was arguing with a shopkeeper. The man was holding a large roll of paper in his hands, and he seemed upset about something. The shopkeeper was trying to calm him down, but the argument was escalating. "Come on, mate," the man shouted. "I've got the money. You can't refuse me now." The shopkeeper raised his hands, looking flustered. "I told you, I don't accept large bills like that. It's too risky, you see. It could be counterfeit." I watched as the man continued to argue with the shopkeeper, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What if they were right? What if the money I had was fake Or worse, what if everyone assumed I was like that man, trying to scam people with something that was too good to be true? I turned away, my mind spinning with anxiety. I couldn't stay on the streets much longer. People were already becoming suspicious, and I hadn't even begun to figure out how to survive with the £1,000,000 note. I needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere I could think without being constantly under scrutiny. I made my way through the winding streets of London, avoiding busy areas and trying to keep a low profile. Eventually, I found myself in a quiet part of the city, far from the main roads. It was a small, somewhat run-down area, with narrow alleys and old buildings that looked like they hadn't seen a coat of paint in years. I walked down one of the alleys and found a small hotel tucked between two shops. It wasn't much, certainly not luxurious, but it would do for now. I could stay here, get some sleep, and try to figure out my next move. I entered the hotel, and the clerk behind the counter greeted me. "Can I help you, sir?" I didn't want to reveal too much about myself, but I needed a place to stay, and this seemed like the best option. "I'll take a room for the night," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. The clerk nodded and handed me a key. "Room 3, sir. You'll find it up the stairs. Enjoy your stay." I took the key and made my way to the room. It was small and sparse, but it was a roof over my head, and for now, that was enough. I locked the door behind. Me sat down on the bed and pulled the banknote from my pocket. As I stared at the £1,000,000 note, I realized the magnitude of the mistake I had made. I had thought I could survive with this money, but it was more of a curse than a blessing. I couldn't use it. I couldn't exchange it. I couldn't do anything with it. It was £1,000,000, but it might as well have been Monopoly money. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like a fool. I had been given an opportunity to change my life, but instead I had ended up trapped in a game I didn't understand. I had no idea what the two gentlemen expected from me, but if I didn't figure something out soon, I would lose the bet, and I would lose everything. The weight of the £1,000,000 note in my hand seemed heavier than ever, and I realized that surviving the next 30 days would require more than just luck. It would take all my wits, and I had no idea where to start. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let this mistake define me. Somehow, I would find a way to make it work. Or at least survive. The next 30 days would be the hardest of my life. Chapter 5. Living the Dream. The days that followed felt like a surreal dream, one that I couldn't quite wake up from. At times I would stop and look around, half expecting everything to dissolve into thin air. I had somehow managed to find myself in a strange and luxurious life, one that seemed to come at the expense of my dignity and pride. I had entered London with nothing, and yet here I was, living in a small hotel room with £1 million banknote that I couldn't use, surrounded by the trappings of a lifestyle that felt both too grand and too hollow. Each morning, I woke up to the same disorienting reality. I would look at the banknote, still tucked into my jacket pocket, and for a moment, I would wonder how I had found myself in this situation. How had it all come to this? I had been given an opportunity to start fresh, to rebuild my life, but instead of feeling empowered, I felt more trapped than ever. The £1 million note had become a symbol of everything I couldn't do. It was a constant reminder that I was living a life I couldn't explain. Every time I went to a cafe or a shop, the fear of being caught with it consumed me. I couldn't buy anything openly, nor could I change it for the currency I needed to survive. It was a cruel irony. I had all this money, but it was essentially useless in my hands. But somehow people didn't seem to notice. They didn't question me when I stayed in that small hotel, or when I walked into shops and simply browsed. I had learned that in London, a man's appearance was more important than anything else. My ragged clothes had been replaced with a simple but respectable suit, the kind of attire that made me blend in with the crowd. I had become part of the scenery, walking the streets without drawing much attention to myself. But it wasn't just the clothes that had changed. It was the way people treated me. Without realizing it, I had begun to live like someone with power, even though I was just pretending. Everywhere I went, I was treated like I belonged. Hotel clerks addressed me with respect. Shopkeepers smiled and gave me special attention. I was a man of apparent importance, someone who had the right to take up space in their world. It felt like a game, one where I was pretending to be someone else. I walked into cafes and was greeted with a level of courtesy that made me feel like a guest of honor. I began to enjoy the luxury of being served without question. The owners of the cafes seemed eager to please me, perhaps because they thought I was a wealthy man in disguise. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. I couldn't tell them that I was living on borrowed time, pretending to be someone I wasn't. One morning, as I sat in a cafe sipping my coffee and watching the world go by, I noticed something strange. There was a woman across the room, sitting alone at a table, glancing at me. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then she smiled. It was a soft, polite smile, nothing too overt. But there was something about it that caught my attention. I returned the smile, unsure of what to make of it. She was a beautiful woman, with delicate features and an air of quiet confidence. She looked like someone who belonged in a world I didn't understand, a world of grace and sophistication. She was dressed in a way that made me feel a little out of place, in a modest but elegant dress that suited her perfectly. After a few moments of awkwardly staring at each other, she stood up and walked over to my table. My heart began to race. Why was she coming over to me? Was it because she recognized that I wasn't who I appeared to be? Or was it something else entirely? "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice light but sure. I couldn't help but notice you. Are you new to London? I was caught off guard by her directness. I hadn't expected to be approached by anyone, let alone someone so graceful. I straightened in my seat, trying to appear as composed as I could. "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling an awkward smile creep onto my face. "Just arrived not long ago." She nodded, her eyes studying me carefully. "I thought so. I've seen many new faces around here, but yours seems different, like someone who is both lost and found at the same time." I wasn't sure what to say to that. Was she referring to the way I looked, or was she speaking to the fact that I felt out of place in this city? I hesitated, unsure how to respond, but she didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she took a seat at the table without asking, as if she had every right to sit there. "I'm Emma," she said, offering me a warm, friendly smile. "I come here often to read. It's one of my favorite places in the city. And you?" I'm just passing through," I said, trying to keep the conversation casual. "I don't have any particular plans." "Passing through?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "London is a hard place to simply pass through, don't you think? People either come here for something or leave with something, but they don't simply pass through." Her words struck a chord with me. She was right, of course. I had come to London with no plan, no destination. But the truth was, I had no idea what I was doing. I was playing a role, pretending to be someone important when all I had was a £1,000,000 note and a hope that somehow I would survive the next 30 days. "I suppose you're right," I said, trying to play along. "I didn't think about it like that." She studied me for a moment, then smiled again. "Well, I'm glad you came here then. It's always nice to meet someone new. If you ever find yourself needing company or just someone to talk to, I'm usually here. You can find me." I nodded, unsure what to say. I hadn't expected to form any connections in this city, especially not with someone like her. But there was something about her demeanor, the way she spoke, that made me want to trust her. Over the next few days, Emma and I met several more times. We spoke about everything: London, life, books, and art. Each time we met, I felt a little more at ease, though a part of me couldn't help but feel guilty. I was living a lie, playing the part of someone I wasn't, and yet she treated me with such kindness, as if I were deserving of it. I was beginning to understand the power of appearance in this city. I had a £1,000,000 note in my pocket, yet I didn't need to use it to make people think I was important. It wasn't the money that made people respect you. It was the way you carried yourself, the way you walked, the way you spoke. And slowly, very slowly, I began to believe in the lie I was living. I became more confident, more comfortable in my new identity. I had access to things I never would have dreamed of before: dinners in fine restaurants, clothes from the best shops, invitations to parties and social gatherings. I was becoming someone, not through hard work or talent, but simply by pretending. But as the days passed, I realized something unsettling. The more I played the part, the more I felt like I was losing myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living a dream, but it was a dream that wasn't mine to begin with. And the more I tried to hold on to it, the more I wondered what would happen when the dream inevitably ended. For now, though, the game was still on, and I had to keep playing. Chapter 6. The dinner invitation. It had been several weeks since my life had taken an unexpected turn. Each day felt like I was living someone else's dream, a dream I had stumbled into by accident. The £1,000,000 note was still in my possession, and despite my best efforts to avoid using it, my life had transformed in ways I never imagined. People treated me differently, as if I had become a part of their world, their elite society. But deep down, I knew that none of it was real. I was still the same man I had been when I first arrived in London. Just a stranger, unsure of where. I was headed, lost in a city that didn't care who I was. And then, one evening, everything changed again. It started with a letter, a formal, elegantly written invitation that was delivered to my hotel. The envelope was thick, made of high-quality paper, and embossed with a golden seal that immediately caught my attention. It was from the American ambassador, a man I had met a few days earlier at a cafe. His name was Mr. Carter, and he had taken an immediate interest in me, even though I wasn't sure why. I had only shared a few brief words with him, but there was something about the way he had looked at me that suggested he saw me as more than just a penniless traveler. The letter was an invitation to a dinner party at his residence. The tone was polite but formal, and it seemed that Mr. Carter wanted to host me as an honored guest. The list of other invitees included some of London's most influential figures, dukes, earls, and other members of the aristocracy. The thought of dining with such high society made me feel both excited and terrified at the same time. Who was I, really, to sit at the same table as these distinguished people? But then again, I had learned that appearances were everything in London. I had been playing the part of a wealthy, influential man for weeks, and this dinner was just another extension of that role. The invitation arrived in the afternoon, and the dinner was set for the evening. I had a few hours to prepare, but I was unsure of how to proceed. My clothes, though clean and respectable, still felt inadequate. I didn't belong in the same room as the guests I imagined would be there. But as I looked at myself in the mirror, I realized that my appearance was all that mattered. It wasn't about who I was, it was about how I presented myself. So I straightened my suit, polished my shoes, and tried to push aside the nervousness that was beginning to well up inside me. When the time came, I took a deep breath and made my way to the address on the invitation. The streets of London were still bustling with activity, and the chill of the evening air hit my face as I stepped out of the hotel. I hailed a carriage, and soon I was being driven through the heart of the city, past grand buildings and elegant townhouses. As we neared the ambassador's residence, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The house was magnificent, a sprawling estate surrounded by manicured gardens and towering gates. The lights inside shone brightly, casting a warm glow on the darkening streets. This was a world I didn't belong to, yet I was about to enter it. The carriage came to a stop, and the footman opened the door for me. I stepped out, my heart racing, and followed him up the grand staircase to the front door. As I entered the foyer, I was greeted by a well-dressed servant who took my coat and directed me into the grand dining hall. The atmosphere inside the house was everything I had imagined. The guests were already gathered, mingling and exchanging pleasantries. I felt completely out of place among them, like an actor who had forgotten his lines. There were men in tuxedos and women in beautiful gowns, laughing and sipping champagne, as if they had been doing it their entire lives. I stood at the entrance for a moment, unsure of what to do, until a voice called out to me, "Ah, there you are." It was Mr. Carter, the American ambassador. He stepped toward me with a warm smile, his hand outstretched. "I'm so glad you could make it. You must be tired from your travels, but I assure you, tonight will be worth it." I took his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Carter. I'm honored to be here." He nodded, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "No need for formalities, my friend. You're among friends tonight. Come, let me introduce you to a few people." I followed him through the room, and as he introduced me to the other guests, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of disbelief. These were people I had only read about in the papers, members of the aristocracy, influential business leaders, and diplomats, and here I was, standing among them as if I belonged. I nodded and smiled, trying to appear confident, but inside, I felt like a fraud. As the evening wore on, the conversation shifted from politics to business, and I found myself standing at the edge of a group of men discussing the latest developments in international trade. I didn't know much about the subject, but I kept quiet, listening intently and nodding occasionally. I had learned by now that in this world, silence was often more valuable than speaking. If I stayed quiet long enough, I could observe the others and learn how to act, how to speak, how to blend in. But then, something unexpected happened. "Mr. Adams," a voice called from behind me. I turned to see a tall, elegant woman standing with a glass of wine in her hand. Her dark hair was pulled back into an intricate updo, and her dress was the color of midnight. Simple, yet striking. There was a quiet confidence about her, something that made her stand out even in a room full of wealthy and powerful people. "May I have a word with you?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. I was taken aback. I hadn't expected anyone to approach me, let alone someone so poised and refined. "Of course," I replied, trying to steady my nerves. She smiled, a polite but knowing smile. "I've been watching you," she said. "You're not like the others, are you?" I blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I beg your pardon?" She tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing. "You're not like the others at this party. The way you hold yourself, the way you speak, it's not what I expected from someone in your position." I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks. She was right, of course. I wasn't who I appeared to be, but I couldn't tell her that. Not here, not now. "I suppose I'm just trying to fit in," I said with a half smile, trying to deflect the conversation. She chuckled softly, her eyes studying me with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "Fit in, yes, but there's more to you than that, isn't there?" I felt a pang of discomfort. How much did she know? Did she see through the mask I had carefully constructed? I didn't want to appear too vulnerable, but I couldn't help but feel a connection with her, a sense that she understood something about me that no one else did. Before I could say anything more, a servant appeared with a tray of drinks, and she excused herself to join another conversation, but not before giving me a lingering look, a look that left me wondering if I had just met someone who could see right through me. As the night wore on, I found myself thinking more and more about her. Who was she? And why had she singled me out from the rest of the guests? I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen, something that would change the course of everything I had built so far. But for now, I was still playing the role, the rich, mysterious man with a hidden past. The dinner was a success in that sense. I had mingled with the elite, held my own in conversations, and even managed to charm a few people with my quiet confidence. As the evening came to a close, Mr. Carter thanked everyone for attending and made his way toward me again. "I'm glad you could join us tonight," he said warmly. "You're welcome in my home any time, Mr. Adams." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unease. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. It was a wonderful evening." But as I stepped out into the cool night air, with the sounds of the city surrounding me, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. The game I had been playing was starting to take on a life of its own, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the consequences. Chapter 7. The Gold Mine Proposal. The days after the dinner with Mr. Carter and the other guests blurred into one another. I had begun to feel like I was living in two separate worlds, one where I was just a poor man with nothing but a £1,000,000 note to his name, and the other, a world of high society where I had somehow managed to gain a place. Every morning I woke up in my small, modest hotel room, a reminder of my true circumstances. But when I stepped out into the streets of London, I became someone else entirely. A man of apparent wealth and influence, walking the paths of aristocrats and businessmen. But despite the success of my charade, something gnawed at me. The truth was that I wasn't really living. I wasn't truly participating in this new world I had found myself in. I was pretending, and the longer I pretended, the harder it became to distinguish where the lie ended and where the truth began. The £1,000,000 note was still in my pocket, and although I had learned how to navigate the city and avoid suspicion, I had yet to figure out how to survive the bet that the two gentlemen had placed upon me. It was on one of those long, aimless walks through London that I met someone who would change everything. I had been wandering near St. James's Park when I noticed a familiar face, a man I had briefly met at the dinner party hosted by Mr. Carter. He was standing outside a small pub, looking anxious, his hands twitching in the pockets of his coat. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I should approach him. But before I could make up my mind, he spotted me. His face lit up with recognition, and he waved me over. "Mr. Adams," he called, his voice a little too eager. "It's good to see you again. I was hoping I might run into you." I walked toward him cautiously, still unsure about the man. He seemed out of place in the bustling city, dressed in a worn suit that didn't quite match the fashionable men I had been mingling with. His hair was unkempt, and there was an air of desperation about him. He seemed familiar, but it took me a moment to remember where I had seen him before. I remember. "You," I said carefully. "We spoke briefly at the dinner." "You're Lloyd Hastings," he interrupted, extending his hand. "Yes, I'm sure you remember. A pleasure, truly." He shook my hand with surprising strength, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. "Yes, of course, Mr. Hastings. What brings you here?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation casual while observing him closely. Lloyd shifted uneasily on his feet, glancing around as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "I've got an idea," he said in a low voice, leaning in slightly. "It's an opportunity, and I think you're the only one who can help me. But I need you to listen first before making any judgments." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening." Lloyd hesitated, taking a deep breath as if steeling himself for something important. "You see, I've been in London for a while now. I've got a business proposal, something that could make both of us a lot of money. But there's a catch. It involves a gold mine, a very special one, and I'm in a bit of a bind. I need your help to make it happen." I frowned, trying to piece together the words. A gold mine? How did that fit into my world of million-pound notes and high society? "A gold mine?" I repeated, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "What kind of proposal are we talking about?" Lloyd glanced around again before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just any gold mine. It's the Gould and Curry gold mine. It's located in California, and I've got the rights to sell shares in it. But no one here in London seems interested in buying them. I've tried everything, public announcements, meetings, you name it. But the investors just don't trust it. They think it's too risky." I was starting to understand, though not fully. "So, you're asking me to help you sell shares in this gold mine?" Lloyd nodded eagerly. "Exactly. You're new to London, right? You're still somewhat of a mystery. You've got that air about you. People will listen to you. If I can get you to endorse this gold mine, people will believe in it. They'll think it's a safe investment, something worth their money, and you'll get a share of the profits. A large one, I might add. I shook my head, still unsure. But I don't know anything about gold mines. How can I convince anyone to invest in something I know nothing about? Lloyd's eyes lit up, his smile widening. That's the beauty of it. You don't need to know anything about the gold mine itself. What matters is your reputation. You're already in the right circles. You've been mingling with all the right people, haven't you? If you back this mine, they'll follow you. You don't even need to say much. Just a few words, a little endorsement, and the shares will sell themselves. I thought about it for a moment, weighing the options in my head. The idea of making money, of truly securing my future in this city, was tempting. But I knew there had to be risks involved. Nothing in life was ever that easy. I'm not sure, I said slowly. I've only just arrived here. I don't know how things work in London. People might see through me, see that I'm just pretending. Lloyd chuckled, his laugh light and dismissive. You're already doing it, aren't you? Pretending, I mean. You've been playing the part of a wealthy man since you got here. You've been rubbing elbows with the elite, making deals, buying things you don't need. What's one more deal? One more step in the game? He was right. I had been playing a role for weeks. And though I didn't like the idea of being part of something so dubious, I realized I had very little to lose. If I could back this gold, mine, perhaps I could start building something real out of the mess I had created. Maybe this would be the opportunity I needed. Okay, I said, finally making up my mind. I'll help you, but you'll need to tell me everything. I need to know exactly what I'm endorsing before I go public with it. Lloyd nodded enthusiastically, clearly relieved. You won't regret it, Mr. Adams. I promise you. We spent the next few hours discussing the details of the mine, and the more I listened, the more I realized that Lloyd was desperate. He spoke about the mine with such conviction, but there was something in his eyes that made me wonder if he truly believed in it, or if he was just trying to convince himself. He talked about the potential profits, the gold that had been extracted from the mine, and the wealth that could be made from selling the shares. But there were no solid guarantees. The mine had been in operation for years, but its future was uncertain, and the financial backers were growing wary. Still, I couldn't ignore the sense of opportunity that was in front of me. This was my chance to break free from the constraints of the bet the two gentlemen had placed on me. I didn't have to live like a ghost in London anymore. If I could make this gold mine proposal work, I would be able to stand on my own. No more pretending. I'll back your mine, I said, standing up from the small table where we had been talking. "But I'm doing this my way. I'll use my connections, but I won't be part of any dishonest deal. If this works, it's because the mine is worth the investment, not because we fooled anyone." Lloyd looked at me with a mix of admiration and relief. "Of course, Mr. Adams, we'll do it your way." And with that, the wheels of the gold mine proposal were set into motion. Little did I know, this decision would change everything, perhaps for better, but perhaps for worse. As I left Lloyd that evening, I could feel the weight of the £1,000,000 note in my pocket once again. It was as if everything had led me to this moment, to a choice that would define my future. The bet had been the starting point, but now I was taking control, or so I thought. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. The next few days passed in a blur, but as they did, I felt a strange sense of momentum building inside me. The decision to back Lloyd Hastings's gold mine proposal was not one I made lightly, but I couldn't deny that it had given me a new sense of purpose. The bet I had been unwittingly forced into, the one that had led me to London with nothing but a £1,000,000 note in my pocket, had now faded into the background, replaced by this new, tangible goal. This was my chance, my opportunity to truly secure a future in London, one where I wouldn't have to rely on lies and pretense. I had a £1,000,000 note in my pocket, but now, for the first time, I felt like I might actually have a real stake in something. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, building something that could last. I had learned to play the game of appearances, but now I wanted to make my mark in a way that was permanent. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't, and the gold mine proposal, for all its risks, offered me a chance to redefine myself. Not as the wealthy man I was pretending to be, but as someone who could take real action. I spent the next few days getting acquainted with the details of the gold mine. Lloyd had given me all the paperwork, showing me the financials, the mining operations, and the share structure. It wasn't a simple deal. There were complicated factors at play, and the mine was far from a sure thing. But Lloyd was right about one thing. There was potential. The gold mine was located in California, an area rich in resources, but it had faced several setbacks. The previous owners had mishandled operations, leading to financial instability. Now, with Lloyd's involvement, the mine was under new management, and they were trying to raise funds to get it back on track. The shares once sold would give the new investors a stake in the mine's future, and if things went well, the profits could be substantial. But selling shares in a mine that had a shaky history wasn't going to be easy. Lloyd was right to seek my help. My recent interactions with London's elite had given me a kind of leverage, even if it was all based on false appearances. I had managed to convince some of the wealthier circles that I was someone of importance, and now I had to use that influence to sell a dream. But there was one thing that bothered me. I had no idea what the long-term impact of this deal would be. What if the mine failed? What if I was caught in the web of a bad investment? Still, I was determined. I had no choice but to push forward. I couldn't afford to fail, not now. I had spent too long pretending, and this was my chance to make something real happen. That afternoon, I met with Lloyd at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of London. We sat at a corner table, away from the noise of the busy street outside, and spread out the papers in front of us. His hands were trembling slightly, a telltale sign of his nerves. He was counting on me, and I could see the weight of that responsibility on his face. "I've already made some initial inquiries with a few investors," Lloyd said, his voice low. "But we need more, many more, if we're going to make this work. I've been telling people that the mine is a guaranteed success, but without your name behind it, I don't think I'll be able to close the deal." I glanced down at the papers in front of me, trying to make sense of the numbers and projections. I had never been particularly good with finance, but I understood enough to know that this was a gamble, a big one. There was a chance it could work, but there was an equally significant chance it could fail. Still, the idea of success, the possibility of making something of my life beyond the £1,000,000 note, was too tempting to resist. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady, despite the uncertainty that swirled inside me. "I'll back this mine. But we need to do it right. We can't make any promises that we can't keep. I'll use my connections, but we need to be careful. We don't want to raise expectations too high, only to disappoint." Lloyd nodded eagerly, relief washing over his face. "Of course, you're right. We can't make any promises, but we can make the investors believe in it. You're the key, Mr. Adams. With your endorsement, we can sell this." "I know we can." I felt a sudden wave of doubt, but I pushed it aside. There was no turning back now. I had made my choice, and I couldn't afford to back out. I had to follow through. That evening, I began reaching out to my contacts, businessmen, bankers, and investors I had met during my time in London. I told them about the gold mine, carefully framing it as an opportunity for those willing to take a risk. I used the credibility I had built to my advantage, speaking with authority, as if I knew everything about the mine and its potential. In reality, I didn't know much, but I had learned that confidence was key. If you spoke with conviction, people believed you, even if you didn't have all the facts. The response was mixed. Some of the investors were intrigued but hesitant. Others were outright dismissive, dismissing the gold mine as too risky. But there were a few, just a few, who seemed interested. The idea of a gold mine in California, especially one that had already produced valuable ore, was enough to spark their curiosity. And for the first time since I arrived in London, I felt like I was gaining ground. Over the next few days, I continued to meet with more potential investors, carefully crafting my pitch, trying to sell them on the promise of the mine without overselling. It was a delicate balance, one that required careful navigation. I couldn't afford to push too hard, or I risked scaring them off. But I also knew that if I didn't take this seriously, the opportunity would slip away. By the end of the week, I had secured a handful of commitments. They weren't huge investors, nothing like the financial giants I had once imagined myself working alongside. But it was a start. The shares were beginning to sell, and as they did, the dream of a successful gold mine felt just a little closer to reality. But there was something deeper at play here, something that gnawed at me as I watched the investors sign on the dotted line. This was my chance to make something real out of my life, to stop pretending and start building. But I was still living on borrowed time. The bet loomed over me, an invisible weight that threatened to pull me back into the lie I had been living. If I succeeded, I would be free from the consequences of my actions. But if I failed, I would lose everything: my reputation, my future, and perhaps even my place in this world I had spent so long trying to fit into. As I closed the deal with one of the investors that afternoon, I realized just how much was riding on this. The gold mine wasn't just a financial opportunity. It was my ticket out of the life I had been forced into. It was a chance to finally take control, to stop being a pawn in someone else's game. That night, I sat in my hotel room, looking out at the lights of London as they twinkled in the distance. The city was alive, full of promise and opportunity. But I knew I couldn't get lost in the glow of it all. The stakes were high, and the game I was playing was more dangerous than I had ever imagined. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was on the verge of something real. A new beginning, one where I could stop pretending and start becoming who I was meant to be. Chapter 9. The Meeting. The days leading up to the meeting were some of the most anxious of my life. I had secured a handful of investors for the gold mine proposal, but everything was far from settled. Lloyd and I had managed to gain some traction, but the real test was ahead of us. The two gentlemen who had placed the bet on my survival, Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris, had been watching me closely. They had seen my success, or at least what appeared to be success, and now it was time to face them, to confront the very people who had put my future in jeopardy. I had no idea what they expected from me, but I knew that the moment of truth had arrived. For weeks I had lived under the pressure of their bet, pretending to be something I wasn't, playing a game that seemed to have no end. I had tried to convince myself that the £1,000,000 note in my pocket didn't matter, that I was in control of my life, but deep down, I knew that the bet loomed over me like a dark cloud. Now, I was about to meet the men who had set this entire thing into motion. It was a cool morning when I received their invitation, a formal note, sealed with wax, bearing their unmistakable insignia. The words were brief, almost curt. "Come to our house at noon. We'll finalize the terms of your success." I had no idea what that meant, but I knew I couldn't avoid the meeting. It was time to face whatever consequences awaited me. The house where Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris lived was a grand, imposing estate located in a quiet part of London, far from the bustle of the city. As I approached, the iron gate swung open, and I was ushered in by a servant who led me through the manicured gardens to the front door. The house itself was a masterpiece of architecture, with tall, stately windows, stone columns, and an air of old-world elegance. Inside, the hallway was adorned with fine paintings and tapestries, each one more impressive than the last. It was a place of wealth and power, and I couldn't help but feel out of place. The servant led me into a spacious drawing room, where Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris were already seated waiting for me. They both looked the same as they had at our first meeting, well-dressed, poised, and composed. But there was something different now. Their eyes held a glimmer of something more, something that I couldn't quite place. They had been watching me closely for weeks, and I could feel the weight of their gaze as I entered the room. "Mr. Adams?" Mr. Harris said, rising to his feet with a smile. "It's good to see you again." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, trying to remain composed despite the nerves that were building in my chest. "I trust everything is well?" Mr. Morris, who had remained silent up until this point, gave a short nod. Yes, everything is as it should be. We've been following your progress with great interest." I could feel my heart race as they spoke. They knew everything. But what exactly did they know? Had they realized the truth? Had they figured out that the gold mine proposal was my way out, That I had found a real opportunity to build something of my own? We've seen the deals you've made, Mr. Harris continued, his voice smooth and calm. The investors, the shares, you've done well. Very well, in fact. But you're not here for praise, are you? I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. No, I said. I'm here to fulfill the terms of the bet. Mr. Morris leaned back in his chair, studying me with a calculating gaze. Yes, of course, the bet. It was always part of the game, wasn't it? But now we must decide how this ends. You've survived the 30 days, Mr. Adams. You've managed to live in London without being caught, without revealing the truth. But there's still one thing left to address. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. And what is that? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The two men exchanged a brief glance before Mr. Harris spoke again. The terms of your success. You've survived, but now we need to determine what you've earned. The bet is over, but the consequences of your actions remain. I blinked, confused. What do you mean, the consequences? You see, Mr. Morris said, his tone shifting slightly. We've been watching you closely, and we've come to a conclusion. You've done well, perhaps better than we expected, but you've also shown us something else, something unexpected. I felt a surge of anxiety. What do you mean? You've shown us that you're more than just a man trying to survive, Mr. Harris said. You've shown us that you can thrive. You've built something from nothing. You've used your resources, your connections, and your wits to make something of yourself. And for that, we have to give you credit. My mind raced. Was this a compliment? Or was there more to this than I understood? I don't understand, I said. You set the terms. I survived. What else is there? Mr. Morris chuckled softly, his eyes narrowing. It's not that simple, Mr. Adams. You see, survival isn't enough. You've proven that you can survive, but we want to know if you can truly succeed, if you can really take what you've built and turn it into something lasting, something real. I stared at them, trying to process what they were saying. Was this some kind of final test? Had they been watching me all along to see if I was worthy of the opportunities I had been given? It felt like the stakes were rising, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what was coming next. What are you asking of me? I asked, my voice steady despite the rising tension. Mr. Harris stood up and walked over to a large desk in the corner of the room. He picked up a small, leather-bound folder and brought it over to me. We've been thinking, he said, placing the folder in front of me. You've played the game well, but now we want to know if you can handle the consequences of winning. If you can handle what it means to truly succeed." I opened the folder, and inside I found a set of documents, financial papers, agreements, contracts. But there was something else, a proposal for a partnership in the very gold mine that I had been backing. "We want to offer you something," Mr. Morris said. "A real opportunity. You've shown us that you have what it takes to succeed in this city, but now we want to see if you're truly worthy of the chance we're offering." My eyes widened as I scanned the documents. The proposal was clear. They were offering me a partnership in the gold mine, a stake in the future of the business, with the potential for enormous profit. It was everything I had been hoping for, everything I had dreamed of since I first arrived in London. But then a thought struck me, one that sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about the gold mine. This was about the bet. The terms of my success weren't just about surviving anymore. They were about proving that I could handle the power that came with the wealth I had gained. Could I navigate the complexities of this new world, or would I be consumed by it? I looked up at Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris, trying to steady my breath. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice firm. "What do you want in return?" Mr. Harris smiled, his expression cold and calculating. "Nothing more than what you've already given, Mr. Adams. You've played our game, and now we want to see if you can win it for yourself." I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the opportunity to leave behind the lie and build something real. But it was also a moment of reckoning. I had succeeded, but what would the consequences be? Could I handle the pressure? Or would I crumble under the weight of the expectations that had been placed on me? I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the papers in front of me. This was the moment that would define my future. The moment when I had to choose whether to accept the offer or walk away from it all. The bet was over. But the real game had just begun. Chapter 10. The Final Twist. The air inside the drawing room was thick with anticipation. I sat across from Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris, the weight of their gazes pressing down on me. For weeks, I had been living in a world of uncertainty, trying to navigate a life built on lies, but the stakes were higher now. The £1,000,000 note in my pocket had brought me to this point, and it was about to shape the next phase of my life. The proposal they had placed in front of me, the partnership in the gold mine, was everything I could have dreamed of. Or, so I thought. I looked down at the papers in front of me, trying to keep my composure. The opportunity was massive. This was not just a chance to survive anymore. It was a chance to thrive, to build something real from the ashes of the life I had been pretending to live. The partnership was my ticket to a future where I would no longer have to hide, no longer have to play the part of a rich man without the means to back it up. This could be the beginning of something truly transformative, something I could call my own. But there was something nagging at the back of my mind, something I couldn't quite shake. Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris had been watching me closely ever since the bet had been placed. They had seen me succeed in their game, using my wits and connections to survive in a city where I had no real place. They were now offering me a partnership that could secure my future. But at what cost? I had played their game, and now it seemed like the final piece of the puzzle was falling into place. But as I reached for the papers, a sharp pang of doubt crept over me. "Mr. Adams," Mr. Harris began, his voice calm but laced with an almost predatory edge. "We've watched your progress with great interest. You've proven yourself more capable than we ever anticipated. But now, the final decision rests with you." I looked up from the documents, meeting his gaze. There was something unsettling about the way he spoke, as though he was testing me once again, pushing me to see just how far I was willing to go. It was as though everything I had done, the deals, the investors, the gold mine proposal, had been nothing more than a prelude to this final test. "You've earned this opportunity," Mr. Morris added, his voice almost too smooth. "But before you make your decision, there's one more thing you should know." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice betraying the unease that had begun to simmer within me. Mr. Harris's smile deepened, but there was something cold in his eyes. "There's a catch, Mr. Adams. You see, we never expected you to come this far. We never thought you would actually make it. We thought the bet would be your downfall. But you've done more than survive. You've thrived. You've outplayed us, in a way." The words hit me like a hammer. Outplayed? What was he saying? I had thought I was playing their game, but it seemed like they had been playing me all along. I sat up straighter, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" I repeated, my voice harder this time. "What's the catch?" Mr. Morris leaned forward, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "The truth is," he said slowly, "we've been watching you for much longer than you realize. From the moment you stepped foot in London, we had a plan for you. You were always part of a larger game. I froze. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. A plan? I echoed. What are you talking about? Mr. Harris's smile widened, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just pulled the rug out from under you, watching you as you struggled to regain your footing. The £1,000,000 note, Mr. Adams, Mr. Harris said, his tone almost mocking. It wasn't just a test of your survival. It was a test of your character. We gave it to you, knowing full well you wouldn't be able to use it. But we also knew that you would find a way to make it work. You see, the note was never meant to help you. It was meant to see what you would do when you were faced with a choice. Would you play the game honestly, or would you take shortcuts? Would you rise above the lie, or would you sink into it? I felt the ground beneath me shift. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. All this time, I had thought I was making decisions on my own, charting my own path in London. But now I realized that everything had been orchestrated. The gold mine proposal, the deals, the people I had met. It had all been part of their plan. They had set the stage, and I had walked right into it without realizing it. You were always the test, Mr. Morris continued, his voice low and dangerous. You were never supposed to succeed. We wanted to see if you could survive, but more importantly, we wanted to see what kind of man you were. And now, we have our answer. I felt a wave of anger surge within me, but I kept it in check. You're telling me this was all a setup? That I was just some pawn in your game? Mr. Harris's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. That's one way to look at it. But what's important now is that you've passed the test. You've shown us what you're capable of. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? Will you accept the opportunity we're offering, or will you walk away? I stared at him, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't about the gold mine or the £1,000,000 note. It was about something deeper. Something I couldn't quite put into words. The world they had created around me was full of illusions, and I had been caught in the web of it all. But now I was faced with the ultimate choice. Would I accept the offer, knowing that it came with strings attached? Or would I walk away and reclaim my freedom? Before I could speak, Mr. Morris added, We've been watching you closely, and we believe you've learned something important along the way. You've learned that survival isn't enough, that to truly succeed, you have to take control. You have to shape your own destiny. I looked down at the papers in front of me, the partnership agreement, the terms of the deal, the promises of wealth and success. It all seemed so tempting. But in that moment, something clicked. I had been living in the shadow of their game for so long that I had forgotten what it meant to truly live on my own terms. I had been chasing a dream that wasn't mine to begin with. It wasn't just about the gold mine or the millions. It was about who I was becoming in the process. I stood up slowly, my decision becoming clearer with each passing second. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done playing your game." Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes. They had underestimated me. They had thought I would be just another pawn in their game, but I wasn't. I had come too far to be controlled by anyone. "I'm leaving," I said firmly, "and I'm doing it on my own terms." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "Very well, Mr. Adams," he said, his voice tinged with respect. "You've proven your worth, but remember, you can never truly escape the game. The choices you make will follow you, no matter where you go." With those words hanging in the air, I turned and walked out of the room, out of their house, and into the unknown. The £1,000,000 note was still in my pocket, but I no longer cared about it. The game was over. I was free. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was living my life, not someone else's. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.